Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. We are back to estate planning of the rich and famous today, where we chat about celebrities in their estate planning, or lack thereof. Today's episode is on the very famous Joan Rivers, who I feel like everyone should know that name. But in case I have some young Legal Tea listeners, just know she was one talented woman. She was an actress, a TV host, an author, a comedian. She was hilarious. She was a woman of many talents. Actually, at her funeral, the eulogy being delivered by Howard Stern described Joan as, quote, brassy in public, classy in private, a troublemaker, trailblazer, pioneer for comics everywhere, who fought the stereotypes that women can't be funny, end quote. And I just loved that description of her, so I wanted to share it. So, yeah, today's episode is on Joan. And as we always do on these types of celebrity estate planning episodes, we're going to first talk about Joan as a person, as a human first. And then we will shift into what happened estate wise following her death 10 years ago in 2014. According to a Wikipedia page, Joan was born in 1933 in Brooklyn, New York. She was a New York girl through and through. Did you know Joan Rivers was not her legal real name? It was actually Joan Molinsky, but she went by and obviously was known as Joan Rivers. And that's kind of an interesting fun fact. I did not know that. She grew up and was raised in New York City area and ultimately graduated from Barnard College, which is a small private college in New York City with a bachelor's in English and anthropology. After college, so now we're in the late 1950s, she participated in a play called Driftwood with none other than Barbra Streisand. Then in the 1960s, she got into comedy and where her world first intersected with some of like the comedic greats like Woody Allen and George Carlin, which George Carlin, by the way, I did a Legal Tea episode on. The 1960s is also when she got into more serious acting and television, and is when she not only was in her first film, which was called Once Upon a Coffee House, but also the first time she appeared on The Tonight Show, which is when the host was Johnny Carson. As her Wikipedia notes, that's really when things took off. And her Wikipedia page actually says, quote, her profile skyrocketed. Shifting into the 1970s, Joan was full-fledged involved in a lot of different things. And also when she started doing more writing as well, including like a 3 times a week article in the Chicago Tribune. She also published her very first book, Having a Baby Can Be a Scream. And really in the 1980s and beyond, she continued to just kind of be everywhere on talk shows, comedy shows, speaking events, game shows, her writing, her acting, etc. She just really was everywhere. And hence how basically everyone knows who Joan Rivers is. This episode would seriously be an hour long if I tried, well, probably much longer than an hour long, if I tried to go into everything that she was involved in, honestly. So more personally speaking, she was married twice. The first marriage was very short-lived. I think it was like 6 months or so. But her second marriage to Edgar Rosenberg was much longer, over 20 years actually, until his death in 1987. According to her Wikipedia page, however, the marriage was not a happy one because 4 days after she asked Edgar for a separation, Edgar committed suicide. And sometime after that, Joan described her marriage to Edgar as, quote, a total sham. Together, however, Joan and Edgar did have a child named Melissa. Joan never remarried after Edgar's death in 1987. And Melissa was Joan's only child. Now, Melissa did have one child herself named Cooper. So Cooper, of course, was Joan's only grandson. Fast forward time to 2014. Joan was having a minor throat procedure. And during the procedure, it was later released by federal officials that the clinic made several mistakes with the procedure, like before and during. And sadly, subsequently, she was put on life support and died a few days later on September 4th, 2014. According to Wikipedia, her daughter Melissa did end up filing a lawsuit against the clinic, and they ended up settling in mid 2016. And part of the settlement actually involved the doctors accepting responsibility for Joan's death. Now, shifting to the estate side of things, it is reported that Joan's total estate was valued at around $150 million, according to Business Insider. So, inquiring minds want to know what happened to Joan's $150 million fortune then? Well, if you're a faithful Legal Tea listener, you know that the last few celebrity estate planning episodes have involved celebrities that actually did a pretty darn good job with planning because there wasn't a whole lot out there about their respective estates. Well, Joan is kind of like that, but maybe falls a little bit more in the middle. I don't know how to explain it, but I can confirm she did have an estate plan, which involved a last will and testament. What that means is her will was put as part of public record once it was filed with the probate court. So I even found the actual document. I put it in the source links for this episode if you want to snoop around. Interestingly, the will does reference a Rosenberg family trust, which was likely established while her late husband Edgar was still living. Her will names 3 people as the executors, that is the ones in charge, which include her daughter Melissa, her business manager Michael Carlin, and her good friend Robert Higdon. And really from there, the will is fairly undescriptive, since it essentially just says, who are the people in charge, my executors, and second, dump everything into my trust. So this kind of will, as we have talked about before here on Legal Tea, is informally in my world called a pour-over will. They call it a pour-over will because in essence, any assets of Joan's that are going through her last will and testament would pour over into the trust. So kind of look at it as like the trust is the beneficiary of the will. Now, we don't know a lot of the specifics about the trust. However, that's pretty common. That's, when I say that, I'm talking that, we don't specifically know who got how much and all that sort of stuff. As we've talked about before, that's kind of the handy dandy thing about trust planning. We just don't know. It's private. Now, there is one part of the last will and testament which touches on something pretty specific, and it relates to a property located in California that the will claims that Joan owned a partial interest in. And it states that Joan owned an interest, and the other interest was owned by a trust named Small Fish Trust that was being managed by none other than Michael Carlin, her business manager. I'm not sure what that was all about, but it seems to me that this house had something to do with her daughter Melissa, because I believe, if I'm sort of connecting the dots in all of this, is that Melissa was a beneficiary of that small fish trust. I did some further digging and found an article from 2019 that shared Melissa was selling that specific house. So maybe it is where Melissa lived or something, and Joan just had like a partial interest in the house. That's my best educated guess. So beyond that, there are plenty of articles out there that talk about all these people inheriting from Joan's estate. So Melissa, her daughter, of course, but also Cooper, her grandchild. And they even reference like a niece and nephew, reference staff members and assistants, and even some charities. The 2 articles that I really used was one from Business Insider and one from Page 6. I think we only know this about them getting stuff, not because of us being able to see the trust document, but some of those people and organizations have actually come out and said things about getting money. So I suppose they could just be making stuff up, but I don't know why they would do that. So here's what is being reported about some of those people. According to page 6, Joan's nephew, Andrew Waxler, is married, and his wife, Lori Waxler, shared with the Post that Andrew received an inheritance. And she said, quote, "We did not know. She was an incredibly generous woman," end quote. So if I take her word for it, it's basically confirmed that that Andrew got something, that Joan left something to her nephew Andrew, and very likely the niece too, Andrew's sister Carolyn. Also, according to page 6, sorry, I had to take a drink. I can hear my voice getting kind of hoarse for some reason. According to page 6, Joan's staff members, like her assistants, Jocelyn Pickett and Sabrina Lott Miller, as well as her publicist, Scott Curry, received money as well. So much like Joan's nephew's wife, Sabrina Lott Miller, who supposedly got something, said that Joan was, quote, generous to a fault. So kind of insinuating that she got something too. Scott Curry, her publicist, also essentially confirmed he got something and said, quote, "Nothing can ever make up for the loss I feel every day. She was such a big part of my life for 25 years. She was an incredible lady," end quote. Along these lines, page 6 said that there was a source close to everyone that said that Joan was a very, very, very close to her staff. And that source actually said that that they knew that Joan had put some of her staff members' kids through school. Lastly, according to page 6, Joan left money to some of her go-to and favorite charities, like first, the Guide Dogs for the Blind in California. Second, God's Love We Deliver, which is a food pantry in Queens, New York. Third, the Jewish Guild for the Blind in Manhattan. Fourth, the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Fifth, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And lastly, the Jewish Home and Hospital Foundation in Manhattan. You know what I love about this episode? I think it beautifully exemplifies Joan being very giving with her money. And it may kind of sound cheesy to say, but her heart as well, to those that were near and dear to her while she was living. I say that after, hearing about her possibly putting some of her staff members' kids through school. It reminded me of something that I hear my very own everyday normal clients say, which will be a nice little positive takeaway from this episode. That, if you can and if it makes sense, you can actually gift things to those near and dear to you. And I don't even mean just money. I also mean like things in your house, like jewelry or tools or, a car or something. I hear clients say that they get a lot of joy out of seeing their kids or grandkids or friends wearing their jewelry or using their tools or driving their car. So many people wait until after they die for things to get distributed. And honestly, at that point, often I see things get kind of tossed away or donated quickly just to get the house cleaned out. I don't know. It's just something to think about and to know as we all age and accumulate money and things in our house that you can always give to people while you're living too. Alrighty, let's wrap this episode up and shift to a sneak peek at next week. Next week, we're back to a cautionary tale episode where we talk about real life clients, real life cases that I or my office have actually worked on. Or maybe they're just generally good things to know and be aware of so you do not slip up and turn into a cautionary tale one day. Next week, we're going to talk about something that may be a little weird or taboo. And if not weird or taboo, sorry, my basset hound just had to shake her collar. Anyways, if not weird or taboo, maybe it's juicy to talk about. What I'm referring to is talking about disinheriting people in your estate plan and how to do it and how not to do it. So tune in for that next week, Legal Tea listeners. Until then, take care and be well.